Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Gabert, Jabmo's Marketing Director, and I'd like to welcome you all to Jabmo's webinar on the psychology of marketing. We're going to wait just a few minutes before we begin to let the last of the attendees trickle in. But while we wait, I wanted to cover just a few housekeeping items. Please use the box in the side panel of your screen to type any questions you may have during the webinar. Our presenters will cover those during the Q&A at the end, but you're welcome to submit a question at any time. So we'll wait just one more minute before we begin. Okay, let's get started. I'd like to introduce Andre Johnson, Jabmo's Global Business Solutions Consultant, and Bridget Sicard, our ABM Operations Manager, who are going to speak to you today about the psychology that powers account-based marketing programs. So take it away, guys.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. There's a curious thought experiment that was referenced in the book The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. The experiment goes like this. If you fold a piece of paper in half 50 times, what will be the width of the paper after the 50th fold? Take a second, think about your answer. Now, most respondents get this question wrong. The average person says something like the width of a phone book. The adventurous responder might say something like the height of a refrigerator. So the answer? The answer is the distance between here and the sun. So how could we be so far off with our initial assumptions? Was there something that we didn't consider? This experiment is so curious because it shows us two things. First, that the human mind thinks about causes and effects in terms of realistic magnitudes. And this makes sense. We live in a world that's governed by realistic principles. So it would be somewhat unreasonable for us to think that folding a piece of paper 50 times would somehow create a stack 92 million miles wide. The second thing this shows us is that seemingly small changes, like the incremental fold of that piece of paper, can have massive, massive impacts. And so today we want to tell you about the baader-meinhof effect and how we and you as marketers can make massive psychological impacts on the people that we market to with just a few small changes to the way that we do things today. The exponential effect of folding that piece of paper over and over is not exclusive to the physical world that we live in. Ideas can also be incredibly infectious, the same way that viruses are. And there's proof of this everywhere in the world. An idea can start a single viral movement, all stemming from one social media post. The value of fine art is another really great example of how infectious an idea can be. The canvas and the paint don't give the work its value. Rather, the value is subjective and based on the context, like the artist and the rarity, and what that means to the people who appreciate it. So how do we make our ideas more infectious? And how can we as marketers explain why some of the ideas that we have win tremendously and others fail miserably? I want to tell you a story about one of our clients. Her name is Karen, and she works as the global marketing manager for a large manufacturing company. Her division accounts for about $500 million in annual revenue, and she's responsible for all of the marketing activities in her group. So she oversees email, SEO, social media, all forms of advertising, the trade shows, and she's the point person for the account-based marketing program. And this was the genesis of our webinar. We had a QBR with Karen about 6 months ago, and we showed her half-year results. She was excited. But then came the question, why? So we spent the next couple of months learning with and really from Karen that the results she was seeing were being driven by psychology as much as they were being driven by marketing technology.
We're looking at the results that Karen showed her leadership and internal stakeholders at her own QBR. And the uplift across channels after an ABM program was implemented was obvious, but what wasn't so obvious is the reason behind that uplift at first glance. When Karen showed the results and explained her team's ABM strategy of coordinating timely and consistent messaging in all the places where her buyers were engaging, her GM actually could put a name to this. He had read something about the baader-meinhof phenomenon and recognized it in the way that their division's marketing messaging was starting to become stickier and stickier, and therefore change the behavior in their buyers, which was leading to more and more uplift over time after an ABM program was established. So she brought that back to us, and she didn't know about it, neither did we. So we decided to do our own research. And we're going to share that with you today. So to define the baader-meinhof phenomenon, it's a cognitive bias that describes humans' tendencies to learn new information and soon after subsequently start seeing it seemingly everywhere. So I'll give you a real-life example to conceptualize it. Imagine you're buying a car. Let's say it's a Honda CR-V. And before you bought it, of course, you noticed it in your everyday life and you knew it existed. But when you bought it and you started driving it, all of a sudden, Honda CR-Vs are seemingly all over the place. It went from something that you saw every now and then to becoming a consistent part of your life. But nothing about your environment actually changed. There wasn't a sudden influx of Honda CR-V enthusiasts in your area. All that changed was you bought that car. And that was enough. That was enough of a stimulus to trigger the baader-meinhof phenomenon. So there are three components to the baader-meinhof phenomenon. The first is the recency effect. And this is where your brain puts the most weight on information that it most recently learned. If you think of your brain like a stack of loose papers, you can consider the information that you learned most recently at the top of that stack. And as we learn more and more information starts to get lost amidst that stack. And that's in part because due to the recency effect, your brain is actually subconsciously filing that information at the top of the stack as the most important. The second component is selective attention. And that's the process of directing your awareness toward relevant or perceiving somewhat important stimuli while ignoring the rest of the noise, perceiving that as insignificant or irrelevant. In the used car example, the Honda CR-V became the perceived important stimuli. And as a result of becoming selectively aware of it, it now stands out from the rest of the thousands of cars that you're seeing every single day. Confirmation bias is the third component, and that happens as a result of the recency effect and selective attention. Confirmation bias is confirming the beliefs that we already formed, whether or not they're fallacies. So if we're selectively aware of that new car and our brains are hardwired to see that recent new car purchase as important, we're subconsciously collecting evidence to confirm that it is important and that there are indeed Honda CR-Vs popping up everywhere. And all it takes is one powerful, well-placed stimulus to combine all three of these components and trigger that baader-meinhof effect. Karen was responsible for a number of channels, and she already had a great attention to detail with those channels, but she took ABM as an opportunity to coordinate her messaging in sales and marketing. And when Karen and Jabmo started working together, her philosophy, her new ABM philosophy, led her team to focus on coordinating the messaging across those platforms, which really started to impact the minds on the other side of the screen. And in order to make sure that their messaging was consistent, they kept four elements in mind for this omni-channel, what we call an omni-channel strategy. The first of these was consistency. So if our buyers were showing up on social media to search for information one day and clicking on an email the next, the story should be the same in both places. Also personalizing this messaging, calling out companies sometimes by name or by logo or industry, made their messaging stand out from all the other noise. Research is showing that we interact with thousands of ads every single day, but how many of those do we actually remember? well, we're more likely to remember the ones that called us out personally instead of ignoring that unimportant stimuli. The third was making sure that their messaging was complementary, building off of a sequence, telling a story over time. B2B buying decisions can take almost a year and a half at this point, so you better be telling a story and keeping your buyers engaged with a new part of that story every time they come back to do more research and find out more about your solutions. And lastly, keeping it as relevant as possible, showing your buyers that you understand their problems and you empathize with them. And that's what Karen did. She was able to show them through storytelling, through consistent messaging, through calling them out by name, and through empathizing with them with relevant content, that her company was able to solve their problems. And that was what made their messaging stick. That was what made the baader-meinhof phenomenon go into effect. Now, we're unknowingly laying a foundation for not just a successful ABM program, but also for bringing that baader-meinhof phenomenon into the picture. And what we're seeing today is that because our buyers, B2B buyers, are engaging with companies on at least 6 different interaction channels throughout their decision journey. Being in those spaces is incredibly important. But companies are falling short in 2 ways. They might not even be in the space in the first place, or they're there with inconsistent, irrelevant, or outdated messaging that isn't telling a story, that isn't keeping that story consistent. And in that case, 2/3 of buyers are leaving this research feeling more frustrated and confused than enlightened. In which case, what's the point of even being there? But companies now have an opportunity, and knowing where that their buyers are, knowing because the research shows that they're seeking out information across channels, they can intentionally trigger this baader-meinhof phenomenon with powerful storytelling. And all humans being hardwired to experience this will react accordingly. And the data and the change in their buyers' behavior and the uplift in engagement is showing that this messaging does stick, and it leads them to notice you seemingly everywhere, confirming biases that they're forming throughout this decision journey and leading them to engage with you more and more.
As companies have become more digital in the way that they talk to their buyers today, there have been an addition of channels. We've seen email, we've seen SEO become much more prominent, especially over the last 10 years. There's a difference, however, between a multi-channel strategy and an omni-channel strategy. Think of multi-channel like stacking 50 messages on top of one another. Maybe this is visualized by 50 separate pieces of paper. Each idea is different, meaning each set of paper is different. There's no compounding because there's no connection. Omni-channel, on the other hand, the silos have been broken down. The messages are coordinated. And now each new message has a compounding effect or a fold of that piece of paper, so that in the end, your impact is orders of magnitude greater from here to the sun. Gladwell mentions that great ideas can spread like epidemics if they're really sticky. And thanks to our experience with Karen, we know that stickiness is a function of the baader-meinhof phenomenon and the psychology behind how we remember things and why we remember things. Every single year, the flu virus starts with a few people getting sick, and ideas really aren't that different. It only takes one well-curated, well-positioned message to start this psychological domino effect within the minds of your buyers. And the domino effect spreads further with every consistent, coordinated, well thought of message that fits within a story. And the beauty of all of this is that we today have the opportunity to be intentional in causing this domino effect. When we market and when we try to sell, we expect something to happen. Karen expected her customers to engage more, to learn about her company and their solutions, and we hope to help in this effort. In the beginning, this is the type of result that Karen was getting through her various marketing channels. There was some from the accounts that mattered most to her, but the reality is that her buyers were not that engaged with the message. Throughout the course of the program, as the messaging became more coordinated and more consistent, buyers started to take notice. The message started to stick, and Karen started to get inside the minds of her buyers. Take a look at email, for example. In the beginning, it was pretty non-existent. Buyers weren't opening the emails. And we see this across the industry. Email open rates are going down. It's a tough thing to have an impact on. But as you can see, email had this major resurgence throughout the life of the program. Same thing with direct. Buyers might not have clicked on an ad per se, but the message stuck. And later, they came and visited her site directly. This is the type of impact that we have for all of our customers here at Jabmo. And as we've seen through this example, 1 + 1 does not equal 2 in terms of the impact that this coordination can have on buyers on the other side of the screen. 1 + 1 instead equals 12. The impact is exponential. And this brings us all the way back to that thought experiment. 50 folds of the piece of paper close the gap between here and the sun, despite all of our assumptions.
Our client taught us that not only buying into an ABM strategy would lift all channels, but that the effect was compounding and much greater than anybody expected. But understanding the why behind that uplift was what led us to implementing operationalized and consistent omni-channel experiences for the minds on the other sides of our client screens. We would love to open the floor to any questions, and feel free to send them in the chat box. The question is, what other benefits are there with Jabmo's omni-channel marketing besides the baader-meinhof phenomenon? Do you want to take that, Andre?
Sure. So outside of the obvious impact that you can have with the direct effort through advertising, we saw through this channel snapshot that a message can sneak into someone's mind, whether it's conscious or unconscious. So the impact is seen not just through the clicks on ads, the emails that tend to get opened at a higher rate, but also through all of these other marketing channels. You can have a huge impact across direct through SEO, all by creating this curated, well thought out message that considers all of the different channels that buyers live in today. Your buyers most likely don't interact with only one channel. They use Google when they're doing research. They think of companies as thought leaders. They consume content from both you, your competition, trade and industry publications. They want to educate themselves. They read the emails that come out to them from companies just like you. And so the impact of the baader-meinhof effect really speaks to the way that buyers use channels today, whether it's one or many.
Right, and to add to that, everyone uses the internet differently. So there are people that are a bit more old school and might not be on, social media channels. And then there's also people who live on the internet and spend hours a day surfing through social media, LinkedIn, keeping their inbox at zero. So it's just important to make sure that we're reaching people across the board who might value a message more in one place than in another.
Great question, thank you. So we have another question. The question is, what does Jabmo's omni-channel marketing look like? How do you coordinate your messages across channel? That's a great question. It all starts with the messaging and the content that you already have today. That's how a program starts with Jabmo. So we go through 2 exercises at the beginning of starting a program. First, we take a look at all of the accounts that matter most in your world. And we do a segmentation exercise where we look at, first of all, the target accounts who you're focused most heavily on. This might be the top 10% of your accounts that make up maybe somewhere between 70 and 80% of your revenue today. We want to think about the unique and intimate differences between each of those accounts and get down to a very granular level with finding these differences. Next, we take the content that you already have today and we repurpose that content into digital advertisements. Then we sequence these messages over a period of time to tell a story that really leads back to your strengths and positions you to win with each of these segmented buyer groups that we've created. From here, we use a number of different channels to take your message to market. So if there are already things that you're doing today, if there are things you're invested in, email, if you're already doing SEO today, we really pull together our efforts from day one and coordinate all of the advertising campaigns that we run with those other channels that you're already using today. So we'll get in line with your email, we'll get in line with your SEO, we'll get in line with everything that you're doing today. Furthermore, we continue to develop that narrative and work as a partner to you. So everything that we do is really about your business today, and you're really the executives that work with us at the end of the day to make this stick.
And on more of a personal level for Jabmo, these efforts are always evolving. So we do practice what we preach. We practice ABM here as well. And what's cool about it is as the way that our buyers engage changes, and the way that the internet changes, marketing also changes, and you can always develop new innovative strategies based on what you're seeing in the data and what you're seeing in your buyers' behavior. Another important thing that we like to practice is aligning sales and marketing and learning from each other, making that one. Breaking down the silos between those two organizations has been really instrumental in the way that we connect with our buyers. We have another question. How much more engagement can we expect to see by using Jabmo ABM? What we see with our customers is that it's over 50% within the first 3 months on average. So it happens quickly, and now we know why.
We know why, and even more importantly, perhaps, is that we can deliver those results back to you. We track everything from day one. So the way that a program starts is that we take a baseline of all of your marketing engagement today so that we have a control group, and we can be really scientific in the way that we compare your baseline results to the results that you start to see once we start the ABM program. So we're all about tracking, we're all about measuring. And I think the greatest thing that I've heard from our clients is how valuable this is when they're able to deliver this report directly to their leadership and point to how impactful the strategy has been.
Well, I think that's all we have today with questions and our presentation. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to Jabmo on any of our marketing platforms, as we talked about today. And thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day and week.